Welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon, and namaste to all our viewers. Welcome all to this 7th day of 3rd summer school organized by Nivaran, the Supreme Court Mediators Initiative. I welcome you all. I am Sharma. I am a senior advocate and a mediator, and today I'll be your host. In the last 6 sessions, which have already gone, the viewers must have experienced about the mediation, how it is, the mediation was how it was introduced, the historical perspective, the negotiations, and the communication skills, how they are to be developed. Today's topic is online mediation. A few years back, when we started our mediation process or mediation skills training program, possibly the online mediation had a limited use. The mediation was sought to be by sitting in an office, a mediator interacting with the parties and facilitating, arrive at a settlement between the parties. And the only digital help with that was of getting exchanged emails or getting some communications only. But as the technology improved, so way back in after 17, 18 or so, digitalization improved, and then came the Skype, Zoom, and Google Meet, and all other things are there. And gradually, the mediators realized that the digital video conferencing could help in having a mediation skills. Mediation sessions could be improved. Pandemic, in fact, has this only a silver line, that mediation has taken a leaps and bounds, and most of the interactive sessions were conducted online. And online session became quite comfortable for the mediators and for the parties. Our today's topic, online mediation, its advantages and its disadvantages. Our speaker will be Andrew Miller. Andrew Miller is a very dependable person. In fact, Nivaran's association with Andrew Miller goes back to January 2020. Just before the pandemic started, we had our physical session with Andrew Miller, and he spoke on a topic of litigation or mediation, which is better, and he spoke for mediation. Then we came April 22, the pandemic came, and in April 2022, he spoke on a topic: what are the right questions to be asked by a mediator during a mediation session? If viewers want to view it, it is the 16th lecture and it is on YouTube. They can go for it. It will be very useful. So today, who could be a better person than Andrew Miller, who had been with us as a mediator in a physical presence and as an online, a person who could give you an advantages or disadvantages, Andrew Miller. Andrew Miller is a barrister and a Queen's Counsel in London, based in London. He is an experience of more than 30 years in mediation and arbitration. And his expertise is commercial, go for insurance, go for construction, go for land property or otherwise and is very successful mediator. Now, I would not take much of your time, and I would invite Andrew Miller, the Queen's Counsel. Just before I invite, by this time, the viewers must have been experienced that all question answer after the main session would be over. There will be a question answer session. The question answer session, you will put a question answer in the chat box. And on those questions, I'll ask on your behalf to Andrew Miller to give a reply. Over to Andrew Miller. All yours.
Thank you very much, Tejanda. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to speak at one of these events, and such an esteemed event. And I've been following it by email, and it looks like that you've had some absolutely fascinating speakers. So I hope I can live up to those that have gone before me. So what this talk is about is I've given a slightly different topic, and I will be talking about online mediation. But the topic I want to give it is a new and permanent way to mediate, or is it a temporary solution? Because as I'll be explaining, and as was just so eloquently said, it was sort of forced upon us. It came upon us via the pandemic, and it wasn't really utilized. It wasn't really thought about before. And before I go to my slides, I will tell you what happened to me in March 2020, which now seems like decades ago. I had a mediation coming up, and I think the mediation was the 18th of March, and we didn't lock down in the UK until the 23rd of March. And a couple of days before the mediation, one of the parties, solicitors, legal representatives, contacted me and told me that their client couldn't come to the mediation in person because sadly they'd recently been through chemotherapy treatment, and their doctor advised them, because of this thing called COVID, that they weren't to travel. So a suggestion was made to me about why don't we have the mediation and hold it via Skype. And I asked what the other side thought of this, and was told that the other side had agreed. And the only person who thought this was the most ridiculous idea was in fact me, because as being at that time and still am someone who's mediating on a weekly basis, always mediating face to face, never gave any thought whatsoever of doing it any other way. It actually seemed ludicrous. So it was a real eye-opener, as it was something that had to happen. What happened in the end was it was hybrid. So one party was there and I was with one party, and the other party appeared via Skype. Like you say, Skype is never used for mediation these days. And it was an eye-opener, as I say, because I saw something that I did not think was possible in terms of getting the mediation done. And that was the start of the journey. Even at that stage, 1 week before lockdown, I did not anticipate that we were going to be doing this as we did for the best part of 1.5 to 2 years. So let me bring my slides up, and hopefully, if this works right, you'll be able to see me on the front of the slide as well. Is that clear? Can everyone see me?
Yes.
Give me a thumb up if you can. So, as I said, my title is Online Mediation, a New and Permanent Way to Mediate or a Temporary Solution. And I pose that as a question, and you'll see why as we go through, as to where we've got to and what I think is actually happening now in the mediation world. So I told you how I got into remote mediation, and I mentioned Skype, and I just got this slide off the internet. And anyone who has not seen an online mediation, certainly in the UK, most of them are undertaken using Zoom. Zoom has a fantastic ability of mimicking effectively what would be the mediation session, because you can have people in private breakout rooms and you can bring them together for a joint session. So it was almost as if it was tailor-made. I personally have mediated on a few platforms. Zoom is the only one I can say that I actually have found to be the one that mimics it best. I don't like using Teams. I don't find it as efficient as Zoom for mediation. It's better for sound because two people can speak at the same time, which they can't on Zoom. But Zoom has been sort of the chosen way forward. Yeah. Now, I think the starting point is just not to assume everyone knows what's meant by online or remote mediation. I use those terms not in any difference. I interchange them. So if the slides say online on one of them and remote on the other, I'm talking about the same thing. But in essence, and it may be that everyone does know, and I'm stating the obvious, so forgive me if I am, the mediator and the parties will attend the mediation via an online platform. As I've told you, it's predominantly Zoom, almost exclusively Zoom in the UK. And they're generally in different locations. And those locations could be, as I've seen, a different location within the same building, a different location in the same city, in the same country, or indeed all over the world. And I personally, my international mediation practice took off because of remote mediation, and I think I've now mediated with parties in at least 15 different countries, if not more. So it has a lot of different meanings as to being in different locations, and just thinking just back a few seconds what I said, and it may sound strange, but I'll come back to what's happening now. Is it can mean that people are in the same building or the room next door to each other, and I'll talk about that a bit more, etc. Again, all meetings, private and joint, take place via the online platform, and the great thing is the parties can utilize the system to exchange documents, etc. To put up I could put up a whiteboard and write things on them right now, and you can do all that. And settlement, if you get to a settlement can be put on screen, etc., and discussed that way. So what was the impetus? Well, as I've said, it was COVID, and there's no getting away from it. It wasn't someone or a group of mediators who sat down and said to themselves, let's try and make mediation better. And in simple terms, something had to be done if mediation was to continue. And when, certainly here in the UK, when we were ordered into lockdown on March 23rd, 2020, I think I had 5 bookings in the diary. Of those, I managed to keep, I think, 3 of them. 2 of them said no, but there were no new bookings. So that was March. I didn't get a single new booking in April or May. I think June was the first one I started to get bookings again. And it was because we started advocating that we could do this. We could do mediations online. And so the mediation fraternity worked on persuading the users of mediation, predominantly the gatekeepers to mediation in the UK, but in most countries are the lawyers, the solicitors, and it was persuading them. And it's people hold it up as if it was a great invention, but it was simply a lack of choice. And that lack of choice advanced online mediation rather than anything else. Standing up for the mediation fraternity, almost all mediators that I know were very quick to learn the skills, and there were quite a lot of teaching webinars, etc. But as I said at the bottom of the slide, in reality, necessity was the mother of invention. And that's what it comes down to, and nothing more. And from having, I actually had a really glorious 2 to 3 months at the beginning of lockdown. The weather was great. I got to know my neighborhood much better. I walked a lot more. Why it suddenly changed was not actually people suddenly thinking that mediation was the online mediation was fantastic and we should go for it. It was part of this necessity being the mother of all invention, and it was clients. It was clients actually going to their lawyers and asking what was happening with their dispute. And their lawyers saying to them, well, we don't know. The courts are in absolute disarray. I can't tell you when the next interlocutory hearing is. I can't tell you when your trial is going to be. And clients saying to their solicitors, well, what are you going to do for me? And solicitors having to think and say, well, I guess we could try mediation. Now, there's a lot packed into that, because in my view, they should have been thinking that a long time before, irrespective of COVID. But I had exactly that experience. I had someone mediating with me who I knew was not a fan of mediation. And at the end of the mediation, we got a settlement. And he told me that story. He said exactly that. Clients are phoning up and we're having to say to them, well, there is this thing called mediation. And that sort of had a snowball effect and increased the number of mediations. And the talk that was mentioned I give online actually covers some of that as to where I think the mediation fraternity let themselves down by not seeing that they suddenly had the ear of clients rather than just lawyers, and they should have done more about it, which sadly they didn't. But that's how it came about. There was no other means of doing it for the best part of a year and a half. So what's the advantages? Well, they're self-evident. It is more cost effective than traditional litigation. That applies to mediation in general, but it certainly applies to remote mediation. There is efficiency in time, preparation, and costs. What I found with my remote mediations, I've probably done about 75 remote mediations, is that they were easier. Certainly when we were in the height of the pandemic, they were much easier to organize. Everyone was in a set place, and that was their home. They were going nowhere. So it was much easier to get mediations organized and get them fast. And so we went from a situation where most of my mediations, I'd say the bookings were 1 to 2 months in advance. My booking suddenly became 3 weeks, 2 weeks, sometimes 1 week, sometimes even the next day. Things started happening much faster. Accessibility, it's all part of the same things. Once people got used to communicating online and via Zoom or whichever platform it was, the mode of access was certainly easy. Flexibility, huge flexibility. You couldn't travel, but you didn't have to travel. All you needed was effectively a laptop or a desktop, or even or an iPad or an iPhone, whatever, or any smartphone, whatever. And then effectiveness. Well, most mediators, I think, will tell you they didn't notice any great difference in terms of settlement rates. About 3 out of 4 mediations continued to settle, if not on the day, then at some time soon after. So all the above, which apply to mediation itself when compared to litigation, applied equally, if not more, to remote mediation. So the question is, what have we learned from it? Because we've now been doing remote mediation for in excess of 2 years. And I think that's important, because this isn't a talk to tell you how to remote mediate. It's to understand what remote mediation is and where it fits in, etc. So I want to look at 4 things. I want to look at the attitudes towards it. I'm going to compare the 2 formats. I'm going to look at the thing that I think is really important, which is the behavior of attendees at remote mediation. Success rate I've already touched upon, but I will expand a little. And I would call what I call a change to the mediation format in itself. So let's talk about the attitude towards mediation. And without doubt, as I said, there was this gap at the beginning. There was initial hesitance, there was skepticism, but that was overcome very, very quickly. And it wasn't overcome, I have to say, simply because individuals thinking that this is fantastic. The hesitancy was overcome because of the convenience side of it. And I mediate commercial mediations, and a lot of my mediations have insurer involvement in them. And people like insurers found it to be absolutely incredibly useful that they didn't have to travel. A lot of them didn't like travel. It applies to lots of businesses. And even when we came out of lockdown and people were in their offices, they could then do it from their offices. That they found that. So the hesitancy there was set aside largely because of convenience rather than anything. There were security issues at first, and there were lots of different stories of people giving out the link to a general email and people suddenly appearing on the screen. Again, once people started to get used to it, that was all that all faded away pretty quickly. And once people introduced passwords, and in fact, once Zoom caught up with some of the security issues that passed, and that's hand in hand with confidentiality issues. People realized that it actually was confidential. When you were in your separate breakout room, no one could hear you at all. And that the same confidentiality that you had if you were in a private room could be secured using it. There were always concerns as to how it would work, and those concerns still exist. And to give an example, only a couple of weeks ago, I was actually talking to a barrister in my chambers who doesn't like mediation. And to my surprise, I discovered in the 2.5 years has not done a single remote mediation. He doesn't recommend mediation to his clients, and he's not in a minority. He put it, not too fine a point on it, he's anti-mediation. And he now will use, not having even experienced remote mediation, he will use it as an excuse not to have a mediation, because he will just tell his clients the process doesn't work. There's no way that the other side wants an online mediation. Well, we won't have a mediation because it won't work. So that's something that pervaded the whole time. But in my view, it was a lot based on what your view on mediation was. If you were what I call a mediation supporter, then you would find a way to try out remote online mediation. Yeah. The other thing was concerns about individuals' involvement with the process. And interestingly, I actually found that solicitors, lawyers themselves, are quite concerned. There's quite a security blanket with having your client sitting next to you and being able to speak for your client all the time. When that's taken away, when your client is just one of the squares on the screen, you're not sure what your involvement exactly is. And perhaps more importantly, you don't have the control over what your client might say. Now, you all know in mediation that doesn't matter because you've got confidentiality. As I say in all my mediations, you can say anything and nothing can bind you until there's a settlement and you agree it and you sign. But that was a concern, and I saw that very much with lawyers themselves. So let's move on to the comparison between the two formats now. There is no doubt in my mind that, and in my experience, I should say, that online mediation it is I call it a good and working alternative. It works. Bottom line, it works. It is usable. It is doable, and it is now tried and tested. So as an alternative to face-to-face, absolutely there are no issues. You can achieve the goal of any mediation is to move the parties from where they are in dispute to achieving a settlement. That is possible. You can do it, and you can do it with remote mediation. Now, all the advantages I set out above in terms of accessibility, flexibility, affordability, and speed apply, and the affordability, in particular, if you're saving on international travel, even domestic travel, and it can be a very good and efficient use of time. But for me, there are disadvantages, and I, of course, as I've told you, I have done about 75 online mediations. I think I was one of the first mediators in the UK to do an online mediations. I did it before lockdown, and I was a huge fan of the process. But now, most of my mediations are back face to face. And if I am asked by the clients, what should we do? What should we go for, face to face or online? My knee-jerk reaction is to say in person, face to face, without blinking or thinking, unless there are reasons not to do it. Now, I did one recently where one of the parties was based in Serbia, and it was a no-brainer, because on that side there were about 8 people, and it was a huge saving of money that they stayed in Serbia, and we did it remote. But most of mine are domestic based, and I think I'm going to go backwards. The one thing with, and you may have found this over this mediation school, so I'll do it backwards. There are issues with being on screen, and tired issues and concentration issues. There is a need for greater concentration. Without any doubt, it's very easy to be on your computer and suddenly you see there's a star against your email, so a new email has come in. It's very easy to be distracted. It's pretty obvious in a room if you pick up your phone when someone's talking to you and you start going through your emails, etc. So it needs a greater concentration. But for me, the biggest disadvantage of online mediation by far is the lack of social interaction. And it's very much how mediation started all those years ago, in terms of what was it that parties were looking for. They were looking to get into a room. They were looking to talk to each other about their disputes. And although, as I understand, you can attend anything almost now socially through this online medium, the bottom line is you're looking at it. I am right now. I'm not looking at all of you. Most of you have your cameras off, which is an exact example of I'm not saying this is criticism, but it's a lack of social interaction. I can't even see most of your faces. There isn't this social interaction. My interaction is with a green dot, because if I go and look at the screen and see who's on there, you see an unflattering side of me. And interaction with a green dot, in my view, is not social interaction. And mediation is about people talking to each other. And so for me, and why I'd say now in excess of 80% of my mediations are back in person, is because parties have realized that as good as it was, as great as it was, something was missing. And it was that ability to get in the room and talk. So that I for me is the biggest fallback. So how do people behave, and how are they still behaving? Lots of people will talk about how a great advantage, it's less stressful. It's more relaxing for participants, especially if their own house. In a dispute that involved individuals, was definitely the case. They could sit there with a cup of tea, coffee, chai, whatever, and be more relaxed. Interestingly, it really depended on people's, in terms of emotions. And I think mediation is something, what makes it so good is you can be emotional. You can't, it's difficult to get the emotions right in a court, because your emotions can be misread as showing you're not telling the truth, as overreacting, etc., or vice versa, whatever. And it can have effect on what the judge, what he or she thinks. But in mediation, it doesn't matter. But you are allowed to express those emotions, and you actually can express emotions that you can't do in court, because in court, all you do is answer questions. You only speak in answer to questions. So it's the ability to show emotions. It was really good, and the fact that you are against the camera, you are actually much closer in online mediation, made it a much better a much better option for that to show emotions. But there were many people who were not ever used, especially the older generation, who weren't used to using computers. And you saw the absolute opposite, and you still do, a lack of emotion, an absolute almost rigidity, and not sure how to act on camera, etc. So it had both ends of the spectrums. Yeah. What you would get, as I said in the last slide about going on the phone, is I noticed you would get actions by attendees that would not happen in a face-to-face mediation. And what do I mean by that? Well, it was not unusual for, sitting there and you'd notice someone had picked up their phone and was on their phone. You could tell, people could look at the camera, but you could tell that they were there happily typing away, doing their emails. And I think the biggest negative to me was really what you see in the internet age, in the social media age, is people behave differently addressing people through a screen than they would necessarily face to face. And by that, I mean they were ruder. In the same way, people are willing to troll people, people are willing to put comments on people that they wouldn't put, they wouldn't dream of saying face to face. So you would see that, you'd see some quite rude things. And what I've actually found is it's got worse. So I actually find that people are now more relaxed. Sometimes they can't be bothered even to set up their computer, so they use their phone. And the worst online mediation is someone using their phone. And I had one recently where on one side, a man who was one of the parties was very, very aggressive, very agitated, very emotional, but was using the screen to almost try and intimidate others. And so was putting his face right to his phone, just and shouting as much as he could. And if we'd been in the same room, he wouldn't have done it. Again, that was the right thing for us to be having an online mediation. He was based in the US, but he was using the forum in a way that didn't, and in that mediation, there was no chance there was going to be a settlement the way he was behaving. So people are using the screen and have all the way through as a protection for themselves. Now, the other side of it is people can feel vulnerable if they're not used to using the screen. They don't know how they're appearing to the other side, and that, as I say, is a feeling of vulnerable. Body language is interesting, because you'll see online, you'll see people talking about You cannot get this close to someone, and I'm moving forward on purpose. You can't get this close to someone in real life. So you can see when you're talking to them, when you have them in the square, you can see their body language. Right? And you know if they're telling the truth, if they're lying, if they're scared, if they're happy with what's happening. Yeah. And I think there's a lot in that. And you do notice when you're looking on. The problem is with online is you're not always looking at them. So I'm not looking at anyone at the moment. I'm looking at the green dot, which is my camera on my MacBook. So the idea that you do notice everything is a bit of I think misconception, because you're not always looking. Whereas in a room, I would be looking at the person. But I had an example, and we came out of lockdown, or semi came out of lockdown, for a very brief period at the end of 2020. So I'd been doing all my mediations online, and I had a construction mediation, and there was an insistence by one party that we had it in person. And you could travel for work, and so we could do it. I had a remote on Zoom session with each side, about an hour long with each side, the day before or 2 days before. And one side had told me things about the other side, and quite strong, dramatic things about him, his personality, whether he was telling the truth, etc. And basically, they said he was the most awful person. On screen, when I had the session with him, there wasn't an indication of anything they had said. He was coming across to me as absolutely, as far as I could see, truthful, straightforward, etc. Wind forward 2 days, go into the mediation in person, and I had a private session with him and with his business partners. And we carried on from where we'd finished. We started talking. And he was exactly the same person as I'd seen on screen. But what my peripheral vision saw was everyone else in the room was their reaction to what he was saying. And their reaction was that this man is lying through his teeth. And so on screen, when I'm just talking to him, I can't see their reactions. Otherwise, I'd be moving around the screen all the time. Even when I'm looking at him. And that was a real lesson for me, that it's not just the person you're talking to in the room that is important. It's other people in the room that tell you the story. And that was a real inkling to it. So body language, just Google body language Zoom and mediations, you'll see so many people saying how fantastic it's much better at assessing body language. Some things yes, but some things definitely no, in my view. Success and failure rates, I've said same as face-to-face mediations, maybe higher. I don't think so anymore. I think it's probably the same. The reason why I had maybe higher on this slide is because it comes back to the necessity point. And if you knew that your trial was not now going to be happening for another X number of months, years, whatever, there was more impetus to settle. You wanted to bring the dispute to an end. So I think initially they were higher success rates in in-person face-to-face mediations. Now I'd say they're pretty much the same, possibly even lower now, possibly lower than face-to-face. And the reason I say it is just thinking about over this year, let's say 2022, when almost all have been in person. Those that haven't, leave aside the international ones, those that haven't have actually been online by default because one side can't be bothered to turn up, or rather doesn't want to travel, etc., isn't keen to mediate, will only mediate if they can sit in their office and do it. And that's not a good start to a mediation anyway, and perhaps explains buying those when there's not a keenness to mediate, why perhaps the settlement rates are slightly below. What changed? I would always have a telephone call with the lawyers before my mediations. And then I, like many mediators, have started, well, let's use Zoom for the call, before the pre-mediation preliminary calls. And I still do that, whether I have a face-to-face mediation or I have an online mediation. I have this preliminary Zoom video conference call, and that has been a game changer. I insist, and I have to insist more and more, that clients turn up, because lawyers don't want their client necessarily to be there. But it really is a game changer, because you can just get all the preliminary things out about confidentiality, tell them about mediation, and that's easy. But for me, I tell them the mediation has started, we can now discuss the mediation. And I get in some preliminary calls, sometimes I'm with them for 2 hours, we get quite a long way in. And they have changed how the mediation day is, whether it's online or whether it's face to face. So as I said, the initial mediation learning is used during those calls. What's mediation? People haven't attended mediation, confidentiality, etc. And that, all of that meant a huge amount of flexibility into how you handled the mediation, and I found that that was, you know, generally enjoyed. But what all of this meant effectively was that you when you got to the mediation day, again, whether it was online or in person, you hit the ground running, and that's still the case. So we even in a sense, even in my face-to-face, which most of my mediations are, there is a good 1 to 2 hours with each party online to start off with in private session. And what has happened, not totally, but in part, is there's been a change to the mediation format. So we went through a stage when I started mediating as a barrister and as acting for a party back in the early 90s. Mediations were not this one size fits all. We're not 1 day mediation, 5 hours prep. You know, the first mediation I went to was a 3-day mediation. And what I started seeing was a change to the format. If you could engage with parties at an early stage, spend 1 hour with them, 2, you know, maybe have a half a day with each party by themselves, then have the mediation day. You're starting the mediation in a different way. The biggest thing is you're not starting with the bit that I don't ever do, which is the traditional opening session, where the mediator is effectively, despite coming in as I think a mediator should, with authority and ownership of a mediation process, starts a process by saying, hello, I am Mr. or Mrs. Mediator, over to you, you just tell me what you want to say. So what you now have is an ability for the mediator to control the process, to talk to the parties beforehand, to say find out what's important to them, the other side, and exchange that over, subject to confidentiality, as to what they should be thinking about and doing. And that ability, not just to tie it down to this 1 day mediation, but have additional sessions before. And I often say, look, the dispute is too big. I know I think you need 2 days. Many times that's accepted, and we'll have a 2-day mediation. But if it's not, I'll say, no, we'll get as far as we can. If we can settle, we'll settle. But what we need to set up is have in place is follow-up Zoom calls the next day or the next week. And it's given a lot of flexibility. And that didn't happen before COVID and before online. So what it's given us is this ability, and of course the tools to do this. And I think that, you know, the greatest thing that people have seen is it can prevent delays. It can encourage earlier discussion of the disputes and earlier discussion of negotiation and settlement. Yeah. That's definitely what it was doing. Mention has been made of the talk I was in. One of the things that I am seeing and have seen really in 2022 is the lawyers grabbing mediation back again and wanting to do it on their terms, and almost wanting the one size fits all mediation again. Not all solicitors, but that's an issue. So those of us who work in this every day are really trying to take the huge benefits of online mediation and pack them into even our face-to-face mediations. So where are we? In the UK, certainly, mediations have returned to being in person and face-to-face, the vast majority. As I said, online still being used. Hybrid is very common, and hybrid takes lots of different forms. So it can be one party being there with the mediator, other party being elsewhere. It can be some people being one party, both parties being there, the mediator, and some people attending the mediation. I did one at the end of July where it actually it was a face-to-face, and this was just shows you why the parties really consider a necessity. On one side, the party was Turkish, the other side, the party were American. They wanted it in person. Whatever happened, they wanted it in person. So they came to London for us to have the mediation in London. But on the American side, there were still 2 people who attended by Zoom. And on the Turkish side, there was 1 person who attended from Turkey. So huge flexibility that's allowed to happen. Yeah. One of the things that I've seen is, and in fact, this was one of the last mediations I did before breaking up for the summer, and it's quite common, is we're having an online mediation. That's what's decided. Okay, all right, I'll be sitting in my chambers doing it. Let me know what, I'll send out to all the parties. And they say, oh, no, we're all going to be in one room, each side tells me. And that doesn't, in my view, make for a good mediation, especially because they use one of the large conference rooms with a camera right at the end of the room. The people are not in the boxes on screen with their faces. The people are scattered around a large conference table. And very often, if it's not a brilliant camera, and some of the older cameras are not, I might not know if I'm speaking to someone or speaking to the water cooler. So that's something that's happened. Now, why has it happened is interesting. It is because lawyers, solicitors don't like being in a different place from their client. And what I've seen, and I see it in real life mediations, in-person mediations, but I see it certainly in remote, and I have a line that I always use. I will address a client, and I will ask the client a question. And from over here, let's say we're in person, the lawyer will answer that question. And my standard line in my mediation is I keep looking at the client and say, wow, you are an amazing ventriloquist, because I could have sworn that the voice came from behind me. And we have fun with that, etc. The lawyer knows I want to hear it from the client, etc. But it's much easier for a lawyer to do that when it's online. You ask a question, the lawyer gets that answer in quickly, and that's why they want to be there. Lawyers love to control the show. I was a lawyer for 30, still am a lawyer, but I practice as an advocate for the best part of 30 years, and I can relate to that happening. Why? So that's something to bear in mind when thinking about it. The other thing is where are we now? Is Zoom fatigue has set in, without a doubt. I haven't counted, but certainly in 2021, I did 2020, I did up-team webinars, and I did a lot in 2021, but probably fewer. In 22, nowhere near as many, and we're not organizing as many in chambers. We actually, in a few weeks' time, I'm going out to Dubai. My chambers runs a conference. I'm speaking out mediation at the conference. We haven't done it for 3 years, and we can't wait to get out. We've been doing things online, and the reason is because we've seen the numbers drop on people attending Zoom. And one of the reasons, and I'm going to have you'll think I'm having a go at all of you, but one of the reasons that I do fewer of them is because I've had enough looking at a blank screen or screens just with names on. You need to see people's faces when you're talking. So this is an example. Most people have their cameras off. So Zoom fatigue has certain. And the last is where, and I should have prefaced a lot of this because these are my personal views, is where are we on social interaction between people? And this is a huge topic. It's a topic I could speak for hours on, and I'm gonna bring it all to an end pretty soon. But I personally think there is nothing like being in the same place, in the same room, talking to a person, interacting with someone. What I think is the real issue with all this, and it's not just for mediation, it's for court appearances as well. And I can only talk about what I see, which is mediation, arbitration, the legal profession. It's the younger members. If I look back and I'm old enough that when I started, there was no such thing as computers and certainly no such things as phones or anything. We still had things were typed. There was still a typing pool in chambers when I started. If someone had sat me down in front of a screen and said, this is your legal world, I'm not sure I'd have been that keen on carrying on as being a barrister. And what we are, it's a very different social interaction through a screen. Young people are very used to interacting through this, but we are starting to see that people are finding it harder to react face to face. And for me, that is a huge negative. That cannot be right. There's a lot of people, to meet in your lifetime. We're a country of 65 million people. You are a country of India, being most of you are from India, we are 1.4 billion. And social interaction for me is such an important thing. And it's such an important life skill that, I'm already seeing, and other people, we've talked about this, I've talked about this a lot to other people, are seeing changes in how people react. And that's only in 2 to 3 years. So I think that's a something to consider and to remember. Yeah. So what about the future? It's here to stay because it is a great tool. There's no doubt about it. For all the negatives I've said, it is a great tool. I've already mentioned more than once the flexibility, the time saving, the cost saving, and especially for international disputes, but not necessarily all international disputes. It's greener. And there's a lot of talk about, that there is a need to have a greener agenda, etc. I always say that mediation is greener, and mediation is greener than litigation. It's greener than arbitration, and so the starting point is that more things should go to mediation. I also, everyone considers the effect on social interaction that it's happening for dispute resolution. I'm not sure how people get into disputes because relationships break down. Most of those big relationships actually are physical. People would have met, they would have discussed, they would have negotiated, etc. Of course, some deals can happen just online and over the telephone, etc. But a lot of these, but if they have happened like that, the natural thing, and it's why mediation works best the sooner it is, the natural thing for me is that people start talking about their dispute and about possible ways to resolve the dispute. And so all of it, the question is it the direction that we want to go in? I don't have the answer to that. I just have raised things that I'm concerned about. I put myself into the category of the older generation. I'm fortunate to have had a fantastic legal practice and legal career for over 30 years. But I do ask the question, is it really where we want to go? That we are dealing with more and more things removed from other people, for one, in this sort of electronic vacuum and not actually interacting with each other at all. And those of you who've got kids will know. I mean, I struggle with my own kids, that their interactions with each other, with their friends, are primarily through a screen. And for me, that, I wonder. So in terms of mediation, and in terms of the resolution of disputes and the proper resolution of disputes, in terms of you're not just solving your dispute, you're trying to make sure that that breakdown in relationship may not get back, the parties may not ever work with each other, say it's commercial with each other again, but you stop the breakdown in the relationship by getting the settlement. And the question is whether you can do that online, or it's just mechanical. One of the other things is, if we do keep advocating online mediation and we do move towards it, what's the next stage? Do we go to AI? And there's plenty of people trying to work on alternative intelligence for mediation. Right? I think by the time they get there, I'll be retired. But and maybe it will be a fantastic thing. Maybe instead of me appearing in 15, 20 years, it will be a bot. I mean, it could be a bot now. You wouldn't know, but maybe it will. And so the question I asked really at the end is, really, what do you want for your dispute resolution? And I've talked about this in the UK and actually in other countries. And I think it's really important as a subject. It's not simply, well, let's talk about online mediation today. Let's talk about this aspect of mediation. Let's talk about that aspect of dispute resolution. Is what do people, what are countries, what are nations, what are continents, what do they want for their dispute for their dispute resolution to be? How do they want it to feel? Do they want it to feel just mechanical, computerized, or do they want it to be what mediation is actually about? Mediation was about people, not just the dispute. It's about people in dispute. And for me, that there needs to be a recognition, and I'm not alone in this. A lot of people are talking about this and saying, it's not just the settlement of disputes, it's how they're settled. It's how people feel after it, because that is the only way that mediation is going to grow. And the steps being taken in India, huge steps to grow mediation. It's got to be what people feel about it and how they feel when they actually get their mediation resolved. So a lot to think about. I will bring it to an end. I thought I'd just share with you, because this goes back now the best part of, I think, nearly 2 years. When I posted this on LinkedIn, if you're not connected to me, please do send me a connection request or follow me. And that was, you'll see that's what I ended up looking like, a little bit exaggerated during my remote mediation, online mediation days. And my photograph I took immediately after going to the barber, I think after about 6 months. And that had a lot of feedback on LinkedIn. And my favorite one was actually someone wrote something, and not verbatim, was I'd far prefer to have the man on the left as my mediator, as he looks like someone who could make a satellite out of twigs and string. So I'm going to leave you on that. Please do follow me on LinkedIn. And thank you very much for being patient. I do hope you'll turn your cameras on. It will be really, really nice to see you all.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for such an enlightening session for online mediation. And just because it's an online, we have got a viewership in this audience from across the globe. We have Brian Spears from UK. He is the president of Commonwealth Lawyers Association. We have Peter Maynard. He is the vice president of Commonwealth Lawyers Association. And it's Rene Baptiste. He is the president of St. Vincent Bar Association and co-chair of ADR Committee, Commonwealth Lawyers. So because it's an online is available, so there is a lot of representation. I welcome and acknowledge them. Now, Andrew, I just go through one by one the questions which have been put by an audience there in the chat box. I've been greatly helpful to my friends, those who have sent me. There is a one, Nivaran Rajiv Datta. Nivaran Rajiv Datta. I am listening to this. Is it all right listening to parties? I feel listening to parties on screen is all right, but negotiating and talking to them on the screen is very different and not so rewarding. What is your views? Rajiv Datta, our senior advocate, he asked him, what are your views on this? You have to
sorry, are you asking Rajiv or you're asking me? That was Rajiv's question.
I'm asking you. This is a question by Rajiv Datta.
Well, Rajiv, hello. Really love to see you. I know Rajiv, and I'll answer it in this way. One, I've already answered because I've told you what I think the problems are. There, for me, Rajiv has hit the nail on the head. There are many, you can keep listing all the positives, but you can't get that feeling that you get in person. You don't, as much as people were sort of telling you it was the same. This is my view, and pretending it was the same, it isn't the same. And I met Rajiv in Delhi and met him and his son, and he took me for an absolutely fantastic meal. And I wonder how it would have been if we'd met online and you were eating perhaps even the same food sitting there in your house, and you'd managed to get the same fantastic, tiffin tin delivered around to me in London. I don't think the experience would have been the same as we had. And I'm being a bit facetious and frivolous with it, but it does come to that. There is, I firmly believe. If I ask my 19-year-old daughter, she will disagree with me. I see us very much as being social beings, and for me that is so important, and that's being lost by the next generation. There is nothing like sitting with someone, talking with someone, to use a Christian phrase, breaking bread with them. There is nothing, breaking chapati, naan with someone. There is nothing like that. And my big fear is we are losing that. And I'm going to finish just doing one funny story. I mentioned my daughter who always comes out with things. A few years ago, we were on an airplane. It was just her mother, me, and we were on a row of four. And I was talking to this man next to me, an American. And I was actually talking to him for most of the flight. It was actually fascinating because it was at the time of the Trump election. That's how many years ago it was. And he actually was, I remember it was June of that year, and he told me why Trump would win. And so it was a fascinating talk. But when we got off the plane, my daughter said to me, how did you know him? And I said, I said he was sitting in whatever 6C, and yeah, but how do you know him before? And I said, I don't. And she said, but then why did you talk to him? And that to me sums up what's we need to keep talking to each other.
Andrew, can I just say one more thing? Hello first, and then I just want to say this. It's a very different feeling when you go and watch a cricket match on the field and when you watch it on the television. And it's like absolutely. Same thing as Wimbledon. I mean, if you were watching on television, you may be just reacting yourself to that, but there's no feel. I mean, the feeling is missing. That's what I wanted.
I watched the women's football England champions 2 weeks ago on TV. It was great, but I would love to have been in Wembley. Yes. The atmosphere must have been phenomenal.
Yes, that's so human, actually.
That's absolutely right, Rajiv. Watching on television and feeling is different, but at the same time, while you are watching, possibly the batsman is bold. You will not even notice. While in television, you'll be able to see how the ball came, how was there, the technology. That advance is there.
So what you're really saying is we can be very good third umpires.
So I know, whatever it is. I know. Let's move ahead with the session. There's a Andrew. There is a one other question. The question is, I'll see he has said in a very long way, but he said, okay, how during online mediation, confidentiality has been considered to be an important component of any mediation. How to cope up with the confidentiality in case of an online mediation? What should the steps should be taken if it is an online mediation, and how it should be done?
It's a good question, and we all adapted our mediation agreements so that they covered online mediation. So everyone still signs a mediation agreement, which effectively binds them to not talking about the mediation. If the mediation isn't successful, to not using anything that's learned at the mediation in the trial. And that's no difference. Can you give me 1 second? I've just got, there's a parcel at the door. Give me 1 second. Excuse me.
Please.
Mr. Jitendra Sharma, you seem to be reading out all the questions within yourself.
No, I'm just looking at the questions. I was just waiting for Andrew. Andrew has gone. He said, excuse for a moment.
I wanted to just break the silence, so I just said hello to you.
Sure. Absolutely right. I've got this question because I was just reading to the questions. Because mobile, not.
In the meantime, you can invite Rajiv Datta to continue his commentary till the time Andrew comes back.
I was very keen to listen to
Bridget
Andrew.
has raised her hand.
Very keen to listen to Andrew. And
Oh, sorry about that. If I didn't get that, I'd be in the doghouse with my wife. So the confidentiality, the agreement has been adapted and it covers all that. Where I think any problems have arisen, and you're right to ask the question, is in the online, if you're in face-to-face, you know who's in the room. In the online world, I could have 5 people sitting the other side of the screen and you wouldn't know. And so I personally, I'm really particular. If anyone is taking part in the mediation, they have to be named on the mediation agreement, even if you're phoning them, even if they're a trainee, if they're coming in, etc. So the difficulty actually has been policing it. And I'm sure in many of my mediations, there have been people taking part that I didn't know about, who weren't on screen, who I couldn't see, but may have been in the room.
In fact, in Supreme Court Mediation Center, what we do whenever we do it online, we always ask for an undertaking form that some undertaking saying that you will not have a recording, you will not share the link, because those problems were there. Yeah. But of course, absolute confidentiality was not there. And at times, what we used to do, a link, because in a separate session, it is ideal. But in one session, private sessions, you can always say the time is different. One party and the second party. Rohit, Bridget is there. Bridget is our regular viewer. Bridget has raised her hand and she wants to ask some question. Rahul or Rohit, could you please just... Bridget Baker, she is from Australia, raised her hand.
Hi, Bridget.
Bridget.
You're on mute, Bridget. Bridget, you're
Rahul?
on mute.
You to unmute. Bridget, are you able to do it?
Look at the microphone symbol on the bottom left-hand side.
Fine.
Okay.
Thank you. The host was not letting me unmute. I'm so sorry. I'm a working mediator and arbitrator from Australia. I'm very interested in what you are saying, Mr. Miller, because we are still in the online mode. And I think that is mostly because of our distances and because the government has taken up mediation, and it is so much cheaper to do everything through the internet than in person. So we are still very much in the online mode, and I'm really interested in what you've been finding, and I will take that on board in my practice. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
There is another question from Venugopal Reddy. Know about the mediation. Your experience about it seems certain special software programs have come into the existence of conducting online mediators, maintaining confidentiality. Are there any special softwares where confidentiality can be maintained? Have you come across? Share your experience.
Not that I know of, because the same thing applies. There could be 10 people sitting in this room that you can't see. So you know, there's no software that can deal with that. One of the things we used to always do in mediation is at the beginning of the mediation day, I mean pre-COVID this is, you know, I would go into each room and with a mediation agreement and get them to sign it. And it was a complete waste of time, you know, of actual time of the mediation day. And what I realized, we need to, as we were meeting online, we need to sort of sort this out. So I actually signed up myself to DocuSign, put my mediation agreements on electronic, make sure I get everyone's email, and they all get it and they all sign it. And I started that for my online mediations, but I have continued it now for my face-to-face mediations. So what it means is that the one thing I do, and it comes back to the last question, I keep pressing and pressing the parties to keep telling me who's going to attend. I don't just ask it once. So I make sure that right up to the day before, is there anyone else going to be attending in any format whatsoever? Are they going to be attending? You know, please let me know, and I get them onto the DocuSign agreement. And it actually, I think the effect of it is quite good, because it actually means that the agreement goes, instead of just sort of going around the table, please sign here on the mediation day, it means that the agreement actually gets into people's inboxes, and they see that they're going to have a look at it, and they're going to have to deal with it. So probably individuals are now who take part are more familiar with confidentiality issues than they probably were in the past.
Thank you, Miller. There is another question by Mr. Masoom Rathod. He has asked basically two questions, but I'll ask one by one. Could online mediation be considered to be a non and offline mediation an exception? And what's the recourse if one of the parties wants it in online mode and other on offline mode?
Well, as I've said, in some cases, there are people who are doing both now, insisting that we have face-to-face and the other side agrees, insisting that we have online, the other side agrees, or both want online, both want face-to-face. One of my mediations where I actually, as best and as politely as I could, berated the parties was they had argued over the format of they argued long enough as to which mediator, and it probably came to me by default because they couldn't agree. You know, they weren't, yeah, and I mean that genuinely, it probably did for that reason. They then argued over venue, and this argument in totality, in fact, they'd already chosen me, but the arguments that then ensued took 9 months. And that was ridiculous. And it then very much came into the mediation room. There was so much animosity between the parties, and that had only got worse. But I think nothing's changed in the sense that there was always the time. It was always, and it still is the case, that there were parties to a dispute where if both didn't want mediation, okay. But there were often times when one didn't want mediation, and that hasn't changed. And so they'll use any excuse. One will say, well, we want a mediation, but we want to meet face to face. And the other will then say, no, we want it on, but we'll only have it online. So that the arguments over mediation haven't, about the mediation actually happening, have not changed because of the online, it being online. They did change during the height of the pandemic, because there was no choice and there was no ability to get things moving in the courts. And that pushed people into mediation a lot more, or it made clients realize that they wanted something done, and so they turned to mediation.
Thank you. Rohit Higgins is one of our viewers. She has raised her hand, and could you unmute her? She want to ask some question.
Good morning. I'm speaking from Jamaica, and I'm very happy to be participating. I have found this session very good.
Good morning.
Yes, it's morning. Good morning for me. Yes, good evening to you. I work with a state-run mortgage lending institution. So when we do mediations, it would really be in instances of default, where we're trying to mediate, finding a way for individuals to service their mortgage loans. However, my question this morning to the presenter is, can you speak to the issue of connectivity, internet connectivity, and how it impacts online mediation? Because we have problems throughout the island of Jamaica. Many persons who would want to participate online have the challenge of internet connectivity. Can you speak to that for me, please?
Only to say, absolutely. I've had that. I don't have to be mediating internationally to have that problem. There are many people in the UK that have whatever the technical term is, narrow broadband width, and suffer from it. Generally speaking, in most of my domestic online mediations, connectivity has not been an issue. It was at the beginning, but that was more technical side. It was more people setting themselves up. It's more people not realizing how to do it, etc. But I have mediated some international ones, and it has been difficult with people not having as strong as internet, falling off the internet. And it really varies. There's no saying, well, it happens in this continent more than another. If you just happen to be in a part of the country, I remember one where one of the parties was in Spain, and they were in the mountains, they had terrible connection, and we kept losing them all the time. But I know that there are many areas of the world where connectivity is not as good as what I experience in the UK, and that is a problem for online mediation. You need, if you're going to have this discussion, you need to be able to connect, and you need to be able to hear clearly, and you need to be able to see clearly. What are you finding where you are in Jamaica?
In some parts of the island, it's very good, most of the times. but there are some areas where the connectivity issues are, I mean, it prevents the possibility of using the online medium because it really is that bad. But in many areas, especially the townships and the capital and the city areas, we're generally good most of the times. So I just wondered from your experience if you saw much of this and if you would get to a place where the mediator has to check in the preliminary mediation whether or not all the parties will be able to gain access or to stay on. I don't know if that's something.
I mean, one of certainly at the early stage, and I guess it still is, but one of the reasons for having a preliminary pre-mediation meeting was to make sure people could connect. Now I always have them, so even when I'm meeting face to face, but you know, where there are gremlins, and sometimes it is someone will not be able to connect properly or adequately, and they'll realize, okay, so I can't do it from home, I need to do it from the office. That happens. Or I can't, you know, they'll connect on their iPhone, and I'll say this won't work, you need, you know, you need to connect preferably on a laptop, etc. But yeah, it's to iron those out. But if people can't change their location and they have terrible internet, you're not going to have a great online session. I mean, one of the things, your camera isn't on. Is that because of
connectivity? Sometimes it's a challenge, so I tend not to turn it on, but I can try now because I want to
love to see you. There you go. There you go. But can I then throw a question back, because I know in my talk I said it at least twice, yeah, and it's one of the issues with online. Yeah, I now can see, apart from myself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, 1 ceiling fan. So 8 people and 1 ceiling fan out of
99 participants
98 people.
Yeah.
And it really raised the question. Hi, Patrick, you've just come on. Where are we going that we're taking part in a 2-hour event, listening and talking, but we can't put our camera on? And that's for me is the troubling side of you know, if there is a troubling side. I don't want to make it so dramatic because there's enough problems going on in the world, but it's what's happening. And when I'm in mediation preliminary meetings, one thing I've noticed, you know, I'll have just one side. It's not both sides. This is just the private session. And if it's 2 people, I can see both of them. But if it's a big group, there'll always be 2 or 3 who leave their cameras off, and they're more junior lawyers, and no one senior in the firm is saying to them, please make sure you have your camera on. You know, all right, you may, you know, I mean, I can tell you I'm wearing a shirt, but I'm in shorts. You don't know I'm in shorts. You don't have to. All someone has to say to them, well, we've got Indian weather here, as you've probably seen. It's now 35 degrees, so we're basking in it. But for me, it's a real. And my daughter would come back to my daughter and say, you know, you're just an old man. It's a generational thing. Yeah. But
I'm not sure if it's only about the age. The age impacts, yes. But it matters to me when I conduct training from work. I always ask participants to open their camera initially so that I know that I'm speaking to someone. It helps me. So I then move on to say, if you have a connectivity issue, because I'm aware of the challenges here in Jamaica, and usually I train island-wide, you may close the camera if you have to, but if you really don't have to, please don't. And invariably, majority of them close the camera.
Yeah. I would like to know what Dr. Parvin's overhead fan has to say about all of this.
There is another. Thank you, Higgins.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your question, and really nice to get from Jamaica.
I have another question from Savio Travaso. basic. What are your views on artificial intelligence in mediation, and how will it impact the online mediation process? Since in my opinion, it appears to be a threat or rather a game spoiler to the mediators who look forward to online mediation.
Again, Savio, it's a really good question. And I don't have an answer because I keep hearing, you know, that they're trying to design AI for mediation, but I've never been shown what that means. So I'm completely in the dark. I don't, but they're trying to create AI for everything. And I dare say, as much as, you know, the world now is totally, utterly unrecognizable to, say, my grandparents. None of them are still with us, but it would be totally unrecognizable to them. You know, to my mother, who's 83, a lot of what I do online, etc., is and what happens in the world is unfamiliar to her. So I dare say, going forward 20, 30, 40 years, there may be something that I can't contemplate. But that's just it. At the moment, I cannot contemplate it. But you know, there may be a computer who can mediate far better than me. I think the chances are I will have retired before that computer comes on the scene. That's my guess.
Thank you, Miller. There are a few more questions, but the time constraints are there. So
I can stay on another few.
few.
I'm happy to stay on until 1:15 if that's if that works, or 1:45 for you.
There's the one question which few questions which said, okay, though even if it is an online mediation, it is going on. I just formulate mine because it is a longer question. I don't want to read it just here. When there is an online mediation going on and there is a power imbalance between the parties, what should be the technique, how to normalize it? While you are in face-to-face, one-to-one, you have so many other options, so many techniques to keep the parties at par and the power imbalance can be neutralized. But how do you do it online? With your experience, what do you say?
I personally, I don't think it's any different online to in person. And I think I like the way you put it, but for me, I think that in many mediations, in many disputes, there's a power imbalance. You don't always have parties of the same size in dispute. So if I think of a recent one I did, which involved an individual's action against one of the magic circle accountancy firms. Well, and he was a past employee. There was a huge power imbalance. They could spend thousands, hundreds of thousands. They could spend millions if they wanted on the case, and they wouldn't even feel it. He can't. So that imbalance will never go away. They have, whatever I think there are $50 billion. Particular one is a $50 billion turnover company. You can't eradicate that power imbalance at all. So I don't think the online changed it. I think it's how you deal with it. And for me, a lot of things in mediation is recognizing it, because you have to be able to acknowledge the power that one side has, don't ignore it, but you also have to be able to encourage the other side to realize that for the purposes of mediation, you can put that to one side. That's why you're in mediation, is to see if you can resolve this today, or if not today, in the near future. And actually, you can use that to your advantage to say, if you don't resolve it, they've got the means to take it further. What does it mean for you? So I don't think you can never get them onto a same level heading, but you use the fact of it to assist you in your in your how you mediate the dispute.
Thank you, Miller. Thank you, Miller. There are a few questions we can always reply on. Somebody wants to ask about the London Mediation Center, the arrangements to be done. We'll reply it on mail. That you don't have to take it. We'll do it. We'll just pass it, Mr. Reddy. We'll just pass it on. Thank you, Miller. Thank you so much. I must thank you for giving us such an enlightenment about the online mediation which is going on. You have effectively said that there are advantages of online mediation, like it's being effectiveness, that it is less stressful, and maybe the success rate is a little higher, and it prevents delay also. But at the same time, there are ground realities that the parties who are able to have a power imbalance, that has to be a balanced one. As a mediator, you are not in a position so effectively see the body languages of the party and so many other things. In India also, we are seeing it nowadays, even in the court appearances. The courts are the regular appearances. The courts are also, when there was an online appearance. We as a litigating counsel, we realized that whenever you are appearing online and when you started appearing physically, there is definitely an inbuilt advantage of appearing physically. So when you are there, the communication is still far better. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew Miller. And
my pleasure. It's been a pleasure. I hope to make it back to India next year. So
sure. We look forward and we'll want to have a continued relationship.
Definitely. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for so many of you turning up today and taking your time to listen. I appreciate it.
Andrew.
And to viewers, before I conclude,
Viewers,
just a moment. Viewers, before I close it down, I just want for tomorrow's session is mediation advocacy. Initially, it was Justice Joy Salush. She was there, but due to some incomprehensible reasons, she is not there. So the tomorrow's speakers would be Ms. Sula Ejijola. She is a barrister from Nigeria, and Mr. JP Singh, a senior advocate at Delhi High Court Mediation Center. So please do attend. It is a wonderful session. Please do it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for viewing.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.